Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Tom Parkin.
And me, Nikki Hill. Thanks for joining. And if you can, tell others about our show. Our audience is building, and your word of mouth really helps us. It's been another busy week in politics across the country, and we're watching a couple of interesting stories that are probably below the fold in your area, but including BC and joining Manitoba in expanding access to menopause hormone therapy, and former Mayor John Tory declines to run against incumbent Mayor Olivia Chow, setting off a chain reaction in the right.
Yeah, and we have a feature interview with Don Davies, the interim leader of the federal NDP, and he's talking with us about Prime Minister Carney's support for Trump's war, his trade investment initiatives, um, and how Social Democrats can deliver on. Well, we talked about housing with him in particular, and what where a social democratic approach builds where others don't.
Yeah, Don's nearing his last few weeks as Canada's interim NDP leader, or Canada's NDP interim leader, and he stepped into that role. And there's definitely not going to be a dull moment for him, I think, in these last few weeks with all these rapid political shifts.
Yeah, but before we get to Don, let's take a look at this week below the fold.
Well, this week we're going to talk about what I would say is a previously taboo topic that is finally in the last couple of years seeing some above the fold action and awareness, which is menopause, and which is also very appropriate with International Women's Day being on March 8th. But some of the aspects we want to talk about are things that people don't always consider when we're talking about women's health and issues like menopause, like economic drivers and workplace equity. So as of March 1, we now have two provinces, BC and Manitoba, covering menopausal hormone therapy. And that comes in from the National Pharmacare Agreement with the federal government. So other provinces could be stepping into this space as well. For those that don't know and don't need to look at these costs, it can cost about menopause hormone therapies can cost anywhere from $240, depending on coverage, because often not covered in your medical plans, up to $1,800 per year. So if you don't have insurance. So, there's obvious cost savings here as we're looking at affordability issues for individuals and families. But what fits into our below the fold theme here is that the fact that there are a growing number of women who are over 40, which is getting into the menopausal age in the workforce in Canada. And by not providing support for menopause treatment, it really has a direct impact on Canada's economic stability and our future growth, which of course are the big priorities for governments right now. So a little bit of data for you, Tom, because I know you're our data guy. So a study in the last couple of years by the Menopause Foundation of Canada found that unmanaged symptoms of menopause cost the Canadian economy an estimated $3.5 billion per year. And so that's with working women, of course, bearing the brunt of that. And their economic analysis here, which is, not only supported by some strong research like Deloitte, but also other partners, show that it's costing employers $237 million annually in lost productivity. So these are really interesting stats, I think, in terms of economic impact of not actually looking at women's health holistically as policy priorities as well. Other stats here are that approximately 540,000 lost days of work can actually be contributed to menopause symptom management. And I think, one of the things that we see is when issues like this are stigmatized, and I've worked around, building awareness around period poverty and menstrual health, and also really highly stigmatized issues, is that when there's not that kind of education, women tend to be blindsided. I certainly see this in my group chat when they actually start getting symptoms, because you could have up to 30 plus menopause symptoms, which most people don't know, and they don't know what they're looking for. So it means you're starting to feel the symptoms, you're in your workplace, you're turning down promotions, you're missing work. And this all leads actually into what we have as a common trend about women's health in Canada and globally, in fairness. But the trends here also show us that if we were dealing with women's health, because most health still does tend to be both research-based, tested, built around men's health, it's not shifting considerably. So if we did actually close this women's health gap, it could result in something I would like, which is 7 more healthy days of life per year for every Canadian woman, and potentially boost the economy by about $37 billion annually by 2040. So we've seen lots of studies here. I think we're getting to a place where there's enough solid base of research now that we're getting this issue above the fold. There was a study last year here in BC only, so it gave us some good stats from the Women's Health Research Institute, who does great work, that menopause symptoms have impacted their job in some way. So I think, as governments focus on building the Canadian economy and more provinces are ensuring that the public can actually participate within the workforce, and these are really critical issues to look at holistically.
Yeah, that's interesting. The data is interesting. The issue of workforce participation is obviously, something that economists will seize on, and is obviously important and true. But
Mhm.
beyond that, I mean, this is I hadn't really, I wasn't aware, Nikki, that BC and Manitoba were moving ahead with creating access to these treatments. And you're right, it is a stigmatized topic. And it's not just economic, but it is economic, but it's not just economic. It is also about being able to be free of stigma to pursue your own health.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I'm wondering if just, leaving all the good economics of this aside, whether that in itself is a valuable step for Canadian society, Canadian workers,
Yeah,
Canadian women.
100%. Yeah. I mean, the more one of the experiences I think we had, and we talked a little bit about this to Bryn Bork, is when we were starting work around menstruation and period poverty in BC, that work has really helped a number of sectors, get access to washrooms. I think about how stigmatized that issue was, and
Yeah,
people weren't even talking about menopause at the point when we started the period poverty work in 2016. Now, you see that shift where companies have understood the need. I think we see more companies looking at menopause support, days off. There's a push for national policy, but there's a lot of toolkits, I think, even just for workplaces now that didn't exist even a few years ago to help them think about how to help employees manage menopause. But again, it goes back into that. The more we talk about it, the less that health stigma is there as well, and the healthier people are and able to participate in their lives.
exactly. Yeah. Key point, right? Let's just let, as Nikki, as you like to say, let's let humans be humans.
Yeah, I do. Okay, Tom, we're
Yeah.
into some politics in Toronto.
Yeah.
So, after months of sending clear signals that he wanted to run, John Tory announced that he won't take on Olivia
Yeah.
Chow for Vancouver mayor. Sorry, Toronto or Vancouver mayor for Toronto mayor this October. So, is this a bit of a surprise? How does it leave this race?
It was a bit of a surprise. Tory was clearly Olivia Chow's closest electoral threat. Polls, however, consistently showed him below, not 10 points below Olivia Chow. And I think he just came to the conclusion that he's going to be 72 in a few weeks. Um, a year of campaigning to lose. Why? You know, um, John Tory quit as mayor in 2023. The story has often been spun that he quit because he was having an affair with a woman who used to work for him in the mayor's office, and that's true, but that's not right. That wasn't really the story. The story was not only that this woman who was known as Ms. A in the conflict of interest documents in the report, not just that she had an affair, that they were having affairs, and apparently they still are. It's a romantic relationship, okay. Um, but that after she left the mayor's office, he helped her get a job and then voted as a city councilor, as a member and mayor of council, in ways that helps her. So the story was that, he the conflict of interest documents show that he spoke with the CEO of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the owner of the Maple Leafs and other sports teams in Toronto, but also significantly the owners of BMO Field. That's where the FIFA World Cup games are going to be played here in Toronto on BMO Field, owned by Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. Ms. A he called up the CEO of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment and said, Ms. A would be great as, quote, your right hand. So he's trying to land her a job. The CEO, you know, speaks to the chief operating officers of venues including BMO Field, and says, see what you can do with this person. And in an email that's reproduced in the report, in the conflict of interest report, there's an email that says that the Ms. A was being lined up for a potential and not yet defined job at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and quote, it sounds like the mayor is putting the lean on us on this one. So so there's this effort to get her into a job at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. Okay, that's not really, that's unsavory, maybe tasteless, maybe, but it's not illegal. But what was illegal is when John Tory then he gets a job eventually at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and she's working on the FIFA bid,
Mm,
and John Tory is voting on
right.
affirming that bid, which then gives Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment via BMO Field $100 million. And he didn't stop to think, well, maybe, hey, I should not be voting on this. Like, this is my girlfriend's income, and gosh, I talk with my wife about stuff. I bet he talks with his spouse or whoever that is to him about stuff. Like, there's just obviously a conflict going on here. Anyway, this is the deep story of why John Tory. It wasn't about
Mm,
an affair per se. It was about a conflict of interest over an important vote that led the way to BMO Field, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, which is, by the way, owned by the Rogers, on whose board he used to serve. And later we found out he was getting paid $100,000 while being mayor from Rogers. It's just like this kind of wacky insider weirdo world. Anyway, he looks at the polls. He can't beat Chow. He decides to pull out, um, and that leaves Brad Bradford in the picture as the candidate of the right. Um, there's been a spin that, well, Bradford was a better candidate anyway. He's the one who actually could take her on. That doesn't seem very likely, given that Tory was showing mid-30 support, Chow was 40 plus, and Bradford was sub 20. That just doesn't make a lot of sense, and nor does it make a sense when we consider what happened right after John Tory's withdrawal, which, um, if Brad Bradford is so great, conservatives will be rallying around him as the candidate of the right. But that's not what happened. And Nick, you'll love. Yeah, I don't know if you followed this one, but you'll love what actually happened the day after. The day after John Tory said he wasn't going to run, um, who should announce that he's running? But did you see this one? The nephew of Doug Ford.
ah,
Yeah,
right.
Michael Ford,
Him and
who
the
used to be,
family. Yep.
yeah, used to be a city councilor, and so just the signal that Michael Ford would be running is clearly an indication that on the right side of the spectrum, there's no galvanizing of support around Bradford. So there's gonna be an ongoing fight on the right for who's going to carry the
Yeah.
banner. And if Bradford is not a good candidate, if he won't give away to somebody else, that's obviously good for Chow. But listen, I've lived in the city almost all my life, and I know that the aristocrats of this town do
And maybe
not.
some cats. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't rest. They don't rest easy, right? When they don't own
Yeah.
City Hall, they go find somebody who they think can own it. So this is obviously a win for Chow. It makes her job maybe easier, but it's certainly not clear that they can't dig somebody up, take Brad Bradford out
Hmm.
of. Maybe Brad Bradford can go work for Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment with a fancy job and a high wage. I don't know. Um, but it's obviously fluid, and at this point positive for Chow, but long way to October still.
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna have to dig into the drama in the Vancouver mayoral
Yeah,
leadership race too in an episode because that's been spicy already. But we'll do that in the future.
yeah,
Okay,
we
so
should talk
lots
about
going
that.
on in okay, well let's take a break and then we're gonna come back with Don Davies. We're excited to welcome our guest today, Canada's NDP interim leader, Don Davies. Before he was first elected MP for Vancouver Kingsway in 2008, Don worked in the labor movement with the Teamsters Union. He has been re-elected to Parliament 5 times since. As NDP health critic, Don stick handled around the Liberals to score the pharmacare plan and dental plan, so we should all owe him a big thanks on that. He was then the finance critic, and he's been interim leader of the party since May after the federal election and when former leader Jagmeet Singh stepped back. So this has been quite the time as well to step into that role, Don. And but knowing how hard you work from personal experience, you've definitely been up to the challenge. And we're really glad that you could join us today on Left East to West.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, Nikki and Tom. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Don, last week was perhaps the first bad week for Mark Carney, who was pressed on a few international points and didn't come out well. In Davos, he pledged that Canada would be, this is his words, principled in our commitment to the prohibition of the use of force, except when consistent with the UN Charter. But then he backed Trump and Netanyahu firing missiles into Iran. Then he regretted backing that, saying that it appears the actions are inconsistent with international law, and that Canada would not be militarily involved. Then he then he said he wouldn't rule out Canada becoming militarily involved in the attacks that he regretted supporting and believed were probably illegal. And he topped this all off by saying that Canada will always support our allies except when we don't. I don't know what that even means. Today, we see news reports. We're recording on Friday for release on Monday. We see news reports that the leadership of our Canadian Armed Forces is being asked to consider a military role in this war. Don, what position has the NDP taken on the legality of these attacks, and should Canada participate in them?
Well, in a word, Tom, the NDP position has been clear. It's wrong. There's just zero question that the joint American-Israeli attack on Iran is a clear violation of every precept of international law and the United Nations Convention, which we're signatory to, by the way. I would also point out, I think it violates internal American law. There's no congressional approval for this attack, but that's a matter for American policymakers to make. But, if I come at it the other way, Tom, and I've characterized this publicly, the position expressed by Prime Minister Carney, it has been unprincipled, it's contradictory, and it's increasingly incoherent. I think the larger picture is, I think what is really, I don't think shocked is too strong a word, Canadians, is what a departure, what a clear departure, what a profound contradiction it is to the sentiments that Prime Minister Carney expressed in Davos, as you point out. And there were other examples too. I mean, one clear principle he voiced in Davos was that for Canada to have any kind of credibility as a middle power, we have to call out transgressions of international law, whether they're committed by our adversaries or by our allies.
Is that what his exact words?
Yeah, I think I'm quoting pretty verbatim. And,
Pretty much.
Mr. Carney, I think quite legitimately got plaudits around the world and in Canada. I think Canadians were quite proud. I mean, I've said to people, frankly, what appears to be an epiphany and revelation to Mr. Carney is something Social Democrats, New Democrats have recognized for decades. It's not new to us that the international order has been ruptured and that there's been a absolutely hypocritical application of rules depending on, who's transgressing them. But, as my fathers used to say, wisdom comes so seldomly that it ought not be rejected when it comes late. So I'm glad Mr. Carney said that, but boy, I tell you, it clearly shows that these were words only to Mr. Carney, and that the Liberal government has really no intention of putting them into action.
Yeah, and I think we're such an interesting time too, I think, in terms of thinking through where the strategy is on this. So, obviously minority government, we're seeing those outreach to get floor crossers as well as, liberal MPs departing. So, and then of course, the desire of any government to have a majority. So constantly thinking about election approach. So, this opening to the right strategy, I can see here where it does help weaken the conservatives and Polyev, because you've got about 63% of conservatives supporting Trump's actions in Iran. So you can see that in sort of if you're trying to get that universe as well. There's some, winnable ideological terrain there. But there was an Angus Reid Institute poll last week that if they're looking at that larger voter universe, only 8% of New Democrat voters and only 17% of liberal voters actually back the airstrike. So
Hmm.
I think, there's been a lot of carrying the left along here for Carney, whether it was through the election and, same for his predecessor, Prime Minister Trudeau. But now that we're seeing this lean into getting these right-wing voters, and so where do you think here moving to the right on this issue could be costing some of that left or center left progressive vote that has been picked up? Like, obviously there could be a strategy here in the Liberal Party that's just seeing the potential in the conservative vote, but adding in this regret statement here, do you think it was a miscalculation on their part or part of their larger electoral strategy?
Well, starting with that narrowest point, Nikki, I think it was a miscalculation.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Carney has been buoyed ever since the election. He's been governing as a conservative, and yet the penny hasn't dropped yet. He continues apparently to retain the support of progressives, and I've often thought
Hmm.
that can't sustain. You can't be governing explicitly like a progressive conservative from the get-go back in May. And I can, he literally ripped policies right out of Poilievre's playbook. He canceled the
Yeah.
carbon tax. He walked back the capital gains exclusion policy. He's cut taxes for the wealthy. He got rid of the wealth tax on the luxury tax, I think it's called, on private jets and yachts. He slashed the public services. He's attacked labor by invoking Section 107. I mean, these are policies that any conservative government in the world would be implementing. And yet, that I think a lot of New Democrats and people, center left voters have stayed with them up to now. And I've
Hmm.
been waiting for this. I think, frankly, that Mr. Carney deserves to have lost the support of progressives months ago. But I think part of the reason is that the alternative to him, Mr. Polyev, is so odious to
Yeah.
center-left voters that people have been prepared to forgive Mr. Carney a lot. But for some reason, I feel this is a step too far on Iran. It has violated too many precepts of the center-left voter. Things like
Hmm.
wanting Canada to be a voice for peace, wanting Canada to act consistently with international law. I still think Canadians to this day are extremely proud that Prime Minister Chrétien kept us out of Iraq. I mean, that seems to have it's become part of our political
Yeah.
um, image of ourselves. And again, like I say, this coming so quick on the heels of Davos, Mr. Carney kind of fortuitously adopted this anti-politician thing, and he was kind of a breath of fresh air. This is
Yeah.
looking pretty darn cynical to me.
Yeah.
I
It got
mean,
Yeah.
got thrown out
it's
pretty quick, didn't it?
absolutely. So I
Yeah.
think, as I say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And I think because the expectations have been so high that this stark departure from that is I think really being felt. And I would just point out as well, it's not just Iran. This follows on the heel of a very tepid, in fact, pro-Trump position on Cuba, and before that
Yeah.
on Venezuela.
Yeah.
Venezuela. Yeah.
So although
Yeah.
Venezuela and Cuba, I think they were precursors to this. I think they sort of woke people up and thought, well, this is kind of odd, but the Iran thing, I feel to I guess steal one of Mr. Carney's words, there's been a rupture now, I think, in the way progressives are viewing Carney, and I think it's an opportunity for New
Mm.
Democrats.
Hmm.
Yeah. One of Trump's arguments for war has been that diplomacy failed, and that's why Iran got back to maybe um, developing nuclear weapons. And that line was echoed by Mr. Carney last week. He repeated this idea that diplomacy failed, so therefore war. Um, even as he was kind of saying, let's try more diplomacy, which I don't know, that seemed a little incoherent in itself. But the greater incoherence is, Don, wasn't it in fact Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu who caused diplomacy to fail?
Well, absolutely. And Tom, I think that is such an important point. You know, what's the old phrase? The first casualty of war is truth.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the whole pretext for this is so transparently false that it's mind-boggling. And frankly, I worry for the state of politics when such obvious fabrications can be mouthed by people who should know better and bought by populations. Look, I wanted to say at the outset, the Iranian administration is a theocratic, oppressive regime.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is not a comment on or an indication of support for the Iranian
Yeah.
government by any means at all. But let's be honest, that region is full of theocratic, oppressive regimes, many of whom we call our allies, like Saudi Arabia. I don't think they allow women to vote, or if they do, it's only been recently.
I've heard
Um,
they can drive cars now, Don.
Yeah, I mean the whole region.
You know.
Of course, that's not mentioning. I mean, I think it's fair to characterize Israel as a theocratic, oppressive regime, particularly over the last couple of years. So there's nothing I think unique about Iran. But if we get right to the pretext given for this, you're right. We had, I think it was the Biden administration, maybe Obama before, had signed a working nuclear control agreement with Iran that had been working. Donald Trump came in and ripped it up. Then, if you remember, and people's memories in politics are short, I realize, but last June, Israel bombed and the Americans bombed nuclear facilities in Iran. And at that time, they said that they had eliminated Iran's nuclear
Right.
ability. And then finally, just most recently, if we actually listen to those that know, the foreign minister of Oman, who was leading discussions between the U.S. and Iran, said that Iran had actually agreed to all of the major requests of the United States, as well as the head of the International Atomic Energy Commission. The Director General has said the same thing, that Iran was not enriching uranium. They had agreed to that they were not. They've said for 20 years that they were not pursuing a nuclear weapon, but they did reserve the right to pursue nuclear energy, which every country in the world,
Right.
Canada has nuclear energy. How can we
Hmm.
really demand any country not to do that? So, you know, I think this was a pretext. Israel has been itching for this war for a long time. I think it,
Mhm.
you know, leads
Well,
some interesting questions about the Epstein issue. And you know, I think it's a fair comment to say the Epstein flames were licking at the White House door a little too closely.
Yeah.
And you know, we've seen this repeatedly through history. What do you do when you want to get the heat off domestic issues? You start a foreign
Sort of war.
conflagration. So that's kind of what it looks like to me.
Yeah. And so I think we were talking also about the prime minister's tough week or so here, and the other foreign affairs catastrophe has been around the India trade mission and the briefing with the Modi government there. So I think, you know, a senior official in that briefing told reporters that the Modi government has ceased attempts at transnational repression in Canada, and that was, you know, framed in a CBC report. And India's high commissioner to Canada repeated very blunt denials of any role in the Hardeep Singh Nijjar killing. But then we've also learned that Canada's Attorney General is asking a court to prevent evidence from being public on national security grounds that's relating to who coordinated and commissioned the murder of Nijjar, which is, you know, just 10 days ago, a Vancouver Sikh activist was told by local
mhm.
police that him and his family are target of a credible plan to murder them. We've certainly even seen those threats within elected officials over the years, very serious. So, you know, is Carney here now on these? And I think we acknowledge that all governments are seeking these new trade partnerships. They're trying to diversify with that U.S. relationship. But, you know, as Carney talks about Canada needing to deal with the world as it is this, does this reflect that, do you think, this India trade mission and sort of playing down these significant interference problems?
Well, in a word, I think Canadians were quite shocked at the attempt, I think, to float an idea that India's transnational repression was no longer an issue. And I'll just state it
Mhm.
bluntly: that's false. It's just false. I actually had the privilege of sitting on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians for 5 years, up until 2025. And while I'm sworn to secrecy about particular things, it's no secret that India, along with China, um, are two of the most active countries in Canada. Not only on domestic interference, but with India, it's more the transnational repression. And
Mhm.
as you pointed out, Nikki, just what, a week ago, the RCMP visited a local Canadian Sikh activist and warned that their lives were in danger as recently as that. So, look, I think you set out the challenge really, really well, which is um, the United States is they're an erratic and unpredictable and frankly insulting and threatening partner. So clearly the policy move has to be to diversify our trade and seek markets
Yeah.
elsewhere. The NDP we've been pushing for that for many years as well, by the way, back to 1988,
Mhm.
frankly. So that's a good thing. But I'm mindful of Mr. Carney's diction that or edict that we have to take the world as it is.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah.
that means taking it as it is and not trying to fabricate a false,
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
false vision of things. So
Yeah.
I don't mind a clear-eyed approach to India and an attempt to maybe reset the relationship and see where we can advantage our economy. But that doesn't need to be accompanied by a myth or
Yeah.
some sort of assertion that anything's changed in the transnational repression. So I thought that looked
Yeah.
subservient. It was unnecessary. I think Modi is an authoritarian leader. Um, and I thought it was unnecessary for Mr. Carney to say. He didn't say it in China. I mean, we went to China and I thought made some
Yeah.
good progress on reducing tariffs, but that was not accompanied by any kind of, you know, um, attempt to cozy up or uh, you know, downplay some of the diplomatic challenges between countries. So again, I think
Uh-huh.
that was another own goal by the Carney administration, and I think you're starting to see the bloom is coming off the rose. I think their arrogance is starting to show. I think their inexperience is starting to show. And frankly, I think people are starting to notice, and India is another example.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And I,
I'll just add too, like we did
mhm.
see, the BC government do an India mission already in this calendar year. So I think it is the framing then about where the interference lays versus the, trying to diversify markets, which I think the public is supportive of. And as you said, so do Democrats.
Mm. Yeah, and Mark Carney also visited Dubai, in the UAE, looking for investment money rather than trade. He says he wants UAE, which is an absolute monarchy, um, governed by billionaires. He wants UAE, read monarchist billionaires, to invest $70 billion in the major projects that he's been considering, specifically mentioning critical mineral refineries that he wants them to invest in. And there's a bunch of questions that roll out of this. But the context is that, we're constantly told that the world wants what Canada has. And that seems true. But why is this being offered only to UAE if it's the world that wants these things? And UAE's um, role in arms trade currently, big suspicions that they're bringing arms into South Sudan, which is under a UN embargo. I think the word suspicion is weak actually here. I think pretty much everybody just accepts this is what UAE is doing. They're running arms into contrary to a UN embargo. So, what is so magic about the UAE and UAE money? Why are there not other investors that might want to set up refineries in Canada for critical minerals or other projects that Mr. Carney might have in mind? And and out of all this, Don, what becomes of these critical minerals? If UAE money is refining them, does that mean that UAE money then owns them?
Yeah, well, I think there's some really fundamental questions about the future of Canada and what the basis for our economic development looks like going forward, raised by that example. When I think of when I hear things like $70 billion being invested by a country
Yeah.
like that, I'm thinking, is that not selling a piece of your economy? Like, to buy
Mhm.
what? And what are the implications for control? Um, so I'm going to say that I think what you're starting to see is the economic vision of who Mr. Carney is, which is a globalist, neoliberal, Goldman Sachs banker. That is his world vision, and I think that he's used to dealing in the terms of global capital. And I personally think that that's not where Canada should be focusing right now. What I've been saying as leader of the NDP for the past year is that this threat from south of the border actually provides an opportunity for us to take a look at our own economy. And what I think we should be
Yeah.
doing is we should be investing ourselves in our own economy. I think we should be becoming more self-sufficient. We should be building more things here. We should be getting more value from our raw resources, as well as diversifying our trade markets. And, the great economies of the world, whether it was UK and its at the height of its colonial power, or the United States when they developed, didn't invite foreign capital in to develop their economy. They used their own capital. Now, we're in a different world now. I'm not saying I'm opposed to strategic partnerships and appropriate foreign investment, but when you're talking about staggering figures like that from countries
Mhm.
like the UAE and Dubai and others, um, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that as an economic plan moving forward. I what I think the failure of the Canadian economy over the last 50 years really has been the failure of Canada's entrepreneurial and managerial class. I think they have not been as risk-takey as the Americans have been. I
Yeah.
think we develop a lot of really promising technology, and when it gets to a certain level, we sell it off
Mhm.
into the Americans.
Yeah.
And this is something where I think too much of the control of the Canadian economy already is in the hands of other countries. One of the reasons
Yeah.
I opposed the free trade agreement in '88 was, I'll preface by saying this: geography is destiny, and Canada and the United States will always be extremely important trading partners, and we need to nurture and carefully manage that relationship, for sure. But to the extent that we can diversify our markets away, I thought then that we should. And so this decision from the right, it was conservatives then followed by the
Mhm.
liberals, to more closely integrate the Canadian economy into the American and now the North American, cedes control and it leaves us vulnerable. It was a merchant in Chinatown that told me it's a vulnerable business that relies on one customer. 75%
Mhm.
of Canada's exports go to the United
Yeah.
States. Like, and now, like, it's like this again, this epiphany of Mr. Carney and others. Oh my goodness, we're vulnerable. This was predictable. Many people,
Yeah.
many progressive economists saw this coming. So anyway, now's the question: what do we do about that? What I do think is that I would rather see policies and programs that seek to develop our own economy with Canadian investment and with Canadian leaderships as the dominant view of economic development going forward. We have $300 billion of infrastructure deficit in this country. That's wastewater treatment plants, that's fresh water supplies, that's ports, roads,
Yeah.
hospitals, schools, you name it. There's no shortage of wonderful projects that, by the way, will create the needed infrastructure that we need, that'll put Canadians to work. And do we really need foreign financing to do that? I'm not sure that we do. So I think you're going to start seeing in clearer terms the true vision of Mr. Carney. Look, he was elected on very narrow grounds, I think, in that election in April. It was who's best to
Mhm.
deal with Trump and who's best to
Yeah.
deal with the economy. And Pierre Poilievre had been basically channeling Donald Trump for several years. So when you had this existential threat from Donald Trump, the last thing Canadians wanted was a MAGA maple like
Yeah.
Mr. Poilievre, and center-left Canadians were terrified of a Poilievre
Yeah.
administration. So that's really why center-left people voted for Mr. Carney, and he has very impressive economic credentials. So when the economy is in tough shape, someone with his economic pedigree was very reassuring to people. But we didn't do a lot of examination of what that really meant. and who he really
Mhm.
was and what he really thought. And frankly, got to clean our side of the street. The New Democrats did not mount a credible offer to Canadians that election. So that's something we're dealing with now, and we're going to
Yeah.
improve. So I think that was a very unique constellation of events on April 28th. But really, what we've elected is the most right wing liberal since maybe more than Paul Martin. And we saw what he did to our country in terms of the impact on social services, um, the ignoring the infrastructure that we need in this country. And I think that as Canadians see more of Mr. Carney's economic philosophy, they're going to be more clear-eyed, I think, about the direction he's going in and the direction that I think a lot of Canadians want us to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I think, and one of our final questions here maybe pivots a little bit into the social program side here, Don, is I think, we still see from the public and, that fear about the US, obviously high for certain types of voters. But we also see they're still prioritizing programs like housing, healthcare, getting those services for families, jobs. Like that's where the public's still laying in terms of public domain polling. And there was a push here where the Carney government campaigned, the Liberals campaigned on doubling the pace of housing construction. So I think one of the questions here is as we see them stand up, Build Canada Homes, which is still, I think, very much being stood up. There's a lot of questions from stakeholders and non-market housing providers of how they can interact, how they can continue, previous partnerships with government, what the direction's going to be on this. So, but what has the NDP been saying about Build Canada Homes in particular, but also knowing that it's not always about, the size of the spend here, it's about how money is spent. What are some of those social democrat housing approaches that could be taken in these programs?
Yeah, well, I always say there's 10,000 issues in politics, but some are foundational, some are
Yeah.
existential. I think housing is foundational and existential. It's that thing that anchors people in community. It makes your ability to exercise your rights of a citizen possible. You know, it, it affects where you work, where your kids go to school,
Hmm.
your connections to community. So it's fundamental, and I think it's the number one issue domestically in
Yeah.
Canada. So, New Democrats have identified that as the need. We have an affordable housing crisis in this country. It's persistent, it's longstanding, it's not an episodic thing. This is structural, and it requires a structural response. So, what we've been saying is number one, it must be prioritized. We have called for, before Mr. Carney's administration used this term, a wartime approach to housing. Just like
Hmm.
after 1945, Canada built, an unprecedented number of homes for returning veterans. Um, so what we've been saying is, I think there's a fundamental difference between us and the Liberals and Conservatives, which is we don't think the answer is market driven. The market plays obviously an important role in producing a lot of different kinds of housing, but it doesn't fundamentally address affordable housing. So we want the federal government
Hmm.
to become involved in, as a major player in a massive way, building non-market housing. You know, a little history is important here.
Yeah.
CMHC used to have a dual mandate up to 1993. They insured mortgages, which they still do. And the second thing was they built non-market housing. And those took five
Hmm.
types: seniors housing, student housing, low-income housing, housing for people living with disabilities, and co-ops.
Co-ops.
At the time, they were building 30,000 units a year. When the Liberals removed the social housing mandate from CMHC, it was them, not the Conservatives. And they've really been effectively out of the game since then up until, now.
Hmm.
You're talking like a generation. My math is
Yeah.
bad, 33 years. Um, Multiply that by, if they had just been building the same number of housing units over that 30 years, you're talking a million
Yeah.
units of affordable housing. Imagine if today we had a million units of affordable housing. Not
Yeah.
only is that satisfying that demand, but it also removes that demand from the private market. So you don't have students out in the private market competing. So this is something we want to get back to. And I applaud the government for establishing Build Canada. Some people have wondered, is that a bit of just an exercise in politicking? Because we already have a Crown Corporation dedicated to housing, that's CMHC.
Yeah.
So is this just a branding exercise? And I got to tell you, I've been in Parliament 18 years. I think this is the third time I have heard major, sexy, grandiose housing policy. Adam Vaughan did it with, I can't remember even the name of the program, with gazillions of dollars announced and all sorts of initiatives. The only thing I never see is the actual damn housing.
Any
Yeah.
houses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure this is not just a politically savvy response where the Liberals are saying the right things. And so far, I do think it's important to give them some time. It's not fair to see action immediately. This is a entrenched problem. It's going to take years
Yeah.
to address. But I got to tell you, I'm not seeing any real numbers yet. In fact, the PBO is suggesting that we're on track to have fewer housing starts next year than we did last year. So that could be
Yeah.
a blip. It could be just while we're getting set up. But we as Social Democrats are going to be pushing the federal government to take a strong role in the non-market housing sector, because we think that that is fundamentally a key answer to making sure that people can have access to homes that are affordable and secure and decent.
Final question, Don. Of course, you'll love this one. It's about the New Democrats themselves. We've also been poking at Mr. Carney and some of the difficulties he's had, but obviously the New Democrats have had a lot of difficulties over the last year since that election, where NDP votes got polarized out of existence, really. When the NDP is now going to select a new leader, and you've been the interim leader, you've been in that job now for since May of last year, so what is that, 10 months? Um, what what advice to anyone, to whoever it is who becomes this next NDP leader? What advice, what humor, what attitude can you give some insight on that helps get through and builds a stronger Social Democratic Party?
Wow, that's a question that I could spend a weekend answering. Um, because there's a lot to it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I will say this: like I genuinely think that we're at a very exciting moment as in social democratic history in Canada. One of the few advantages of being burnt to the ground is you get to build a new foundation, and the opportunity to reimagine what a strong progressive national option looks like in this country, I think is unprecedented. It feels like 1960, 61 to me, where we have the chance as Social Democrats to do that. So I guess a couple things I would say is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I think that we need to have a really thorough and honest inventory. And, that I always think that there's nothing wrong with our values. I think our values are solid. And when we do that sort of introspective examination, we will reconfirm our values, I think. It's the policies and maybe our communication techniques and how we talk to people that I think we have to really have a hard look at. So I would say, look, let's be innovative. Let's try new things. I also would suggest this, that we need to meet people where they're at. I think New Democrats is part of our problem is sometimes we are trying to sell progressive ideas to the people that we claim to represent. And even if they're good policies, I think we have to reverse that. We've got to spend a lot of time with working people, working families, listening to them and developing processes where we can reflect their priorities and speak in terms that are familiar and comforting to them. I think Jack Layton did that. He managed to, I think real lefties trusted Jack, but Jack also had a pragmatic and practical appeal. People trusted him uh, to govern. I think that's the magic sauce for Social Democrats. And the final thing I'll say is,
Yeah.
here's a real thing that inspires me and makes me hopeful, is that I've talked to a ton of people across party lines. And one thing that I get unanimity on is that Canadians do not want a US-style two-party system.
Yeah.
People have a real appreciation. Even conservatives will tell me that they want to see a vibrant NDP. What do we say? A bird doesn't fly without a left wing. I think this country works better. Our democracy functions in our unique Canadian way when we have a range of ideas, a diversity of options. And by the way, who the hell is going to keep the Liberals if they are going to be governing? Who's going to be voicing those progressive policies on
Yeah.
healthcare, on affordable housing, on foreign policy, like we talked about? It's not going to come from the Conservatives. So right now we got two Conservative parties in the House of Commons. We need a strong progressive voice, and I think Canadians want that. So this is our opportunity, I would say to the new leader, is let's have a refreshed, bold, um, reflective, resonant, social democratic set of policies that are popular and respond to people's real needs in this country. And if we can sort of reshape ourselves as that, shed what has been irritating or doesn't work, and not be afraid to do that, then I'm really optimistic about the next election and our future.
Well, Don,
Yeah.
thanks for joining us. It's it's great to hear your thoughts. This is an incredibly strange week. It's been a strange week, I think, in Canadian politics, and you've helped us see some clarity amongst a lot of really confusing and incoherent statements from our prime minister. So, thanks for joining us and shedding some light.
Oh, thank you. I'm really
Yeah.
grateful
Thanks
for the
for being
opportunity.
here. And one more
Thanks,
thank you, because
Nikki.
we talked about menopause and HRT into pharmacare. So thank you for the pharmacare work as well that's coming
Right.
into place, because we've got that topic in the show too. So
Well, let's celebrate that. March 1, just a few days ago, BC actually
yeah,
implemented, and all for the first time in history, Canadians will be able to walk into a pharmacy for their diabetes meds and
yeah,
contraceptive meds, and now also their menopausal meds, all because of the work we did last Parliament, laying the ground.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
lots to celebrate, lots of work to do, and thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thanks,
Thank
John.
you.
All right. Before we wrap up, we're at the part of the show where we uh, like to call Love It or Heave It, which is about something we love and want to keep, or something we want to heave and forever forget. So, Nikki, this week, are you loving or are you heaving something?
I'm loving some this week. I mean, I'm going to say I'm loving it this week. I hope I don't live to regret my love for this, because I haven't actually seen issues lately that have been had so many opinions on them. But this weekend was the last time that we changed our clocks in BC as
Fatal
the
error.
province enact. Yeah, I will see. We'll
Yeah.
see.
No.
I don't know. Like I said,
Ended.
we'll see if I still love it. So enacting a 6-year-old, so not breaking news like it was being framed, but a 6-year-old commitment from this government to end seasonal time change. And so it has been a flurry of opinions since it was announced, between the difference between whether we should be setting into daylight savings or standard time or changing it all. And I've actually been quite surprised at the passion around this issue. But for now, I think we're going to go with yay to no change again. Premier Evie brought out a bunch of kids who jumped and sang and
Oh,
expressed their
sure.
opinions on excitement for time change. I'm sure they held
Right.
deeply. But this is, something that had been paused since 2019 to try to work across some of the Western states who had some indication they might come on board, but haven't moved that way. And we are seeing some other Western provinces now
Yeah.
talking about if they might follow suit. So we'll keep it as a hot debate issue, but for now, I was happy to
Mm.
bid the time change adieu.
Well, those children, I guess, I guess they're looking forward to walking to school in the dark and it's being dark
Kids love
more and,
that.
just colder. It's going to get cold in Vancouver now. But it is interesting because Saskatchewan, of course, doesn't have a time
Yeah,
shift. Alberta being in the middle, kind of does it force them to say, well, should we just also uh,
yeah.
fall in? So, there's some
We'll
sense
see
to
where
it.
it goes.
But I gotta say, it's taken away time in the evening, is it not? In the summer,
Uh, Honestly,
it's
I've
making the
lost
summer.
track of all the debates.
Anyway, I don't know. Okay,
Okay, well, Tom, what are you
yeah,
loving or
yeah,
heaving
yeah.
this week?
Okay, I'm really loving something. I'm loving something about how Canadians see Canadians. Maybe you saw this Pew
Mhm.
Research poll. It actually became a bit of an internet sensation. overnight, where there was a poll of people in 25 countries around the world asking them about their opinions of the moral and ethical principles of their fellow citizens. And amongst the 25 states, Canadians were the most likely, 92%, to say that other Canadians were good morally and ethically. Just
Yeah.
7% saying people are bad.
Yeah.
Canadians are bad. And, I think there's a lot to that. Some of the other runners up were, let's see here, India, close, Sweden, Australia, um, also Japan, Mexico, UK. They were all above 80% who said people in my country are basically good.
Yeah.
And I think about this in a couple of ways. I think there's three thoughts here, Nikki, all interwoven. One was, if you have faith in your fellow citizen, it's probably good in times of crisis that you can
Hmm.
pull through. You can pull together and pull through, not fall apart. The second thought is what was disturbing about this poll was that the United States was at the
Yeah.
bottom. More people had a negative view of the morality and ethics of their fellow American United
She's
States
really
citizens.
telling, I think, there.
And
Yeah.
that to me is a bit disturbing as somebody who lives right by their border, because to me that's the opposite. That's falling
Hmm.
apart at a time of crisis.
Hmm.
So that's quite worrying. Now, the third part is what's I found fascinating about this as well in that context was we often think Canadians and people in the United States are very similar, and we watch the same TV, we watch
Yeah.
the same movies, we follow the same sports, we speak the same language, we have family back and forth across the border. But this is a really significant finding, it seems to me, about
Hmm.
that indicates that there is a deep cultural distinction between people in the United States and in Canada.
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
fascinating. And actually, there's a fourth point. For a long time, the far right, the real racists, have been telling us that you have a high trust country where people trust each other, where you have, you know, people of one ethnicity, people of one religion, people of one
Right.
ancestry. Canada is none of those. Canada's Canada is distinctly diverse.
Hmm.
So this is
Yeah.
just utter, repudiation of that theory of what creates trust and what a society of high trust can
Hmm.
is.
Yeah, I've seen lots of play on the US numbers, but I love lifting up the Canadian numbers in
Yeah.
that comparison of what it means to us with those partners. So, and that is our show today. So we'll be back next Monday with more left, east to west for you. And thanks for tuning in.
See you then.
Thanks for joining Left East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Harkin. We love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left East to West. We'll see you next week.